Hello everyone! I hope you're ready for another adventure, because today Wayne continues to read Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Always remember that as we go through these amazing adventures and read these outstanding stories, all you have to do is press the CC button in the YouTube link in order to follow along with the words. Now I think that Ozzy will be perfect to join us for today's adventure. Now that Ozzy's here, let's jump in. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, Chapter 3, The Night Bus. Harry was several streets away before he collapsed onto the wall in Magnolia Crescent, panting from the effort of dragging his trunk. He sat quite still, anger still surging through him, listening to the frantic thumping of his heart. But after 10 minutes alone in the dark street, a new emotion overtook him, panic. Whichever way he looked at it, he had never been in a worse fix. He was stranded quite alone in a dark muggle world with absolutely nowhere to go. And the worst of it was, he had just done some serious magic, which meant that he was almost certainly expelled from Hogwarts. He had broken the decree of the restriction of underage wizards so badly, he was surprised the ministry's representatives weren't swooping down on him where he sat. Harry shivered and looked up and down Magnolia Crescent. What was going to happen to him? Would he be arrested? Or would he simply be outlawed from the wizarding world? He thought of Ron and Hermione, and his heart sank even lower. Harry was sure that, criminal or not, Ron and Hermione want to help him now, but they both went abroad, and with Hedgewood gone, he had no means of contacting them. He didn't have any muggle money either. There was a little wizard gold in the money bag at the bottom of his trunk, but the rest of his fortune his parents had left him was stored in a vault at Gringotts Wizard Bank in London. He'd never be able to drag his trunk all the way to London unless... He looked at his wand, which he was still clutching in his hand. If he'd already been expelled, his heart was now thumping painfully fast. A bit more magic couldn't hurt. He did have the invisibility cloak he'd inherited from his father. What if he'd bewitched the trunk to be as light as a feather, tied it to his broomstick, covered himself in the cloak, and flew to London? Then he could get the rest of the money out of his vault, and then begin to live life as an outcast. It was a horrible prospect, but he couldn't sit on this wall forever, or he'd find himself trying to explain to Muggle police why he'd be out in the dead of night with a trunk full of spellbooks and a broomstick. Harry opened his trunk again and pushed the contents aside, looking for the invisibility cloak. But before he found it, he straightened up suddenly, looking all around him once more. A funny prickling in the back of his neck made Harry feel like he was being watched, but the street appeared to be deserted, and none of the lights shone from any of the large square houses. He bent back over his trunk, but almost immediately stood up once more. His hand clenched his wand. He had sensed, rather than heard it, someone or something was standing in the narrow gap between the garage and the fence behind him. Harry squinted at the back alleyway. If only it would move, then he'd know whether it was a stray cat or something else. Lumos, Harry muttered, with a light appeared at the end of his wand, almost dazzling him. He held it high over the head. At the end of the pebble-washed walls of number 2 suddenly sparkled. The garage door gleamed, and between them Harry saw quite distinctly the hulking outline of something very big with wide, gleaming eyes. Harry jumped backwards. His legs hit the trunk and he tripped. His wand flew out of his hand as he flung his arm to break his fall, and he landed hard in the gutter. There was a deafening bang, and Harry threw his hands up to shield his eyes against the blinding light. With a yell, he rolled back onto the pavement just in time. A second later, a gigantic pair of wheels and headlights screeched onto the halt, exactly where Harry had just been lying. They belonged, as Harry saw when he raised his head, to a triple-decker bus, violently purple, which had appeared in the thin of air. Gold lettering all over the windshield spelled The Night Bus. For a split second, Harry wondered if he'd been knocked silly by this fall. Then a conductor in a blue-purple leapt out of the bus and began to speak loudly in the night. "Welcome to the Night Bus, emergency transport for the stranded witcher-wizard. Just stick out your wand, step on board, and we can take you anywhere you want to go. My name is Stan Shunkpipe. I will be a conductor this eve." The conductor stopped abruptly. He had just caught sight of Harry, who was still sitting on the ground. Harry snatched up his wand again and scrambled up to his feet. Close up, he saw that Stan Shunpipe was only a few years older than he was, 18 or 19 at most, with large protruding ears and quite a few pimples. "What were you doing down there?" said Stan, dropping his professional manner. "Fell over," said Harry. "Shoe fall over for?" sniggered Stan. "I didn't do it on purpose," Harry said, annoyed. One of the knees in his jeans was torn, and the hand that he had thrown out to break his fall was bleeding. He suddenly remembered why he had fallen over, and turned around quickly to stare at the alleyway between the garage and the fence. The night bus's headlamps were flooding with light, and it was empty. "What you looking at?" said Stan. There was a big black thing, said Harry, pointing uncertainly to the gap, like a dog but massive. He looked around at Stan, whose mouth was slightly open. With a feeling of unease, Harry saw Stan's eyes move to the scar on Harry's forehead. "What was that on your head?" said Stan abruptly. "Nothing," said Harry quickly, flattening his hair onto the scar. If the Ministry of Magic was looking for him, he didn't want to make it known for him. "What's your name?" Stan persisted. "Neville Longbottom," said Harry, saying the first name that came to mind. "So, is this bus?" He went on quickly, hoping to distract Dan. "Did you say it goes anywhere?" "Yep," said Stan proudly. "Anywhere you like, long as it's online. Can't do nothing on the water." "Yeah," he said, looking suspicious again. "You did flag us down, didn't you? Stuck out your wand then, didn't you?" "Yeah," said Harry quickly. "Listen, how much would it take to get to London?" 11 shekels, said Stan. "But for 13 you get chocolate, and 15 you get boiled water, and toothbrush in the color of your choice." Harry rummaged through his trunk, extracted his money bag, and shoved some gold into Stan's hand. He and Stan then lifted the trunk, with Hedwig's cave balanced on top, up the steps of the bus. There were no seats. Instead, half a dozen brass bedposts stood beside the curtained windows. Candles were burning in brackets beside each bed, illuminating the wood-paneled walls. A tiny wizard in nightcap at the rear of the bus muttered, "Not now, thanks, I'm picking up some slugs," and rolled over in his sleep. "You have this one," Stan whispered, shoving Harry's trunk under the bed right beside the driver, who was sitting in an armchair in the front seat of the steering wheel. "This is our driver, Ernie Prang. This is Neville Longbottom, Ern." Ernie Prang, an elderly wizard wearing his thick glasses, nodded to Harry, who nervously flattened his bangs and sat down on his bed. "Take her away, Ern," said Stan, sitting on the armchair next to Ernie. There was another tremendous bang, and the next moment, Harry found himself flat on his bed, thrown backwards by the speed of the night bus. Pulling himself upwards, Harry stared out the dark window and saw that they were now bowling along completely different sets of streets. Stan was watching Harry's stunned face with great enjoyment. "This is where we was before you flagged us down," he said. "Where are we, Ern?" "Somewhere in Wales." "Arr," said Ernie. "How come them muggles don't hear the bus?" said Harry. "Them?" said Harry contemptuously. "Don't listen properly, do they? Don't look properly either. Never notice nothing, they don't." "Let's go wake up Madame Marsh, Stan," said Ern. "We'll be in Abergarny in a minute." Stan passed Harry's bed and disappeared up a narrow wooden staircase. Harry was still looking out the window, feeling incredibly nervous. Ernie didn't seem to have mastered the use of the steering wheel. The night bus kept mounting the pavement, but it didn't hit anything. Lines of lampposts, mailboxes, and trash cans jumped in and out of its way as it approached, and back into position once it passed. Stan came downstairs, followed by a faintly green witch, wrapped in a traveling cloak. "There you go, Madame Marsh," said Stan happily as Ern stamped on the brake, and the bed slid a foot or so towards the front of the bus. Madame Marsh clamped a handkerchief on her mouth and charted down the steps. Stan threw her bag out after her and rammed the door shut. There was another loud bang, and then they were thundering down the narrow country lane, trees leaping out of the way. Harry wouldn't have been able to sleep, even if he had been traveling on a bus that didn't keep banging loudly and jumping 100 miles at a time. His stomach churned as he fell back to wondering what was going to happen to him, and whether the Dursleys had managed to get Aunt Marge off the ceiling. Stan had unfurled a copy of the Daily Prophet and was now reading with his tongue between his teeth. A large photograph of a sunken-faced man with long, matted hair blinked narrowly at Harry from the front page. He looked strangely familiar. "That man," said Harry, forgetting his troubles for a moment. "He's on the Muggle news." Stanley turned to the front page and chuckled. "Sirius Black," he said, nodding. "Of course he was on the Muggle news, Neville. Where have you been?" He gave a superior sort of chuckle at the blank look on Harry's face and handed it to Harry. "You ought to read more papers, Neville." Harry held the paper up to the candlelight and read, "Black still at large. Sirius Black, possibly the most infamous prisoner ever held in Azkaban Fortress, is still eluding capture, the Ministry confirmed today. We are doing all we can to recapture Black," said the Minister of Magic Cornelius Fudge this morning, "and we beg the magical community to remain calm." Fudge has been criticized by some members of the International Federation of Warlocks for informing the Muggle Prime Minister of the crisis. "Well, really, I had to. Don't you know," said an irritated Fudge. "Black is mad. He's a danger to anyone who crosses him, magic or Muggle. I have the Prime Minister's assurance that he will not breathe a word of Black's true identity to anyone, and let's face it, who'd believe him if he did? The Muggles have been told that Black is carrying a gun, a kind of metal wand that Muggles use to kill each other. The magical community lives in fear of a massacre like that of 12 years ago when Black murdered 13 people with a single curse." Harry looked into the shadowed eyes of Sirius Black, the only part of the shrunken face that seemed alive. Harry had never met a vampire before, but he had seen pictures of them in Defense Against the Dark Arts classes, and Black, with his waxy white skin, looked just like one. Scary looking thing, isn't he? Stan, who has been watching Harry read. He murdered 13 people, said Harry, handing the page to Stan, with one curse? Yep, in front of witnesses and all, broad daylight. Big trouble it caused. Didn't it, Ern? Ern, said Ern darkly. Stan swiveled in his armchair, his hands on the back, the better to look at Harry. Black was a big supporter of you-know-who, he said. What, Voldemort? Said Harry without thinking. Even Stan's temples went white. Ern jerked the steering wheel with a wand so hard the farmhouse had to jump aside to avoid hitting it. "Who out of your tree?" yelled Stan. "Choose say his name for." "Sorry," said Harry hastily. "Sorry, I forgot. Forgot, said Stan weakly. Blimey, my art's going so fast. So Black was a supporter of you-know-who?" Harry prompted apologetically. "Yeah," said Stan, still rubbing his chest. "That's right. Very close to you-know-who, they say. Anyway, when little Harry Potter got the better of you-know-who," Harry nervously flattened his bangs down again. "All of you-know-who's supporters tracked him down, wasn't they, Aaron? Most of them knew it wasn't over, with you-know-who gone, and they all came quiet, but not Sirius Black. I heard he thought he'd be second in command to you-know-who once he'd taken over. Anyway, they cornered Black in the middle of a street full of muggles, and Black took out his wand and blasted half the street apart, and a wizard got it, and so did half of muggles got it. Horrible, eh? And you know what Black did then?" Stan continued in a dramatic whisper. "What?" said Harry. "Laughed," said Stan. "Just stood there and laughed. And when reinforcements from the Ministry of Magic got there, he went with them, quick as a fink, still laughing his head off. 'Cause he's mad, isn't he? In the end, if he wasn't when he went to Azkaban, he will be now," said Ern in a low voice. "I'd blow myself up before I'd set a foot in that place. Serves him right, mind you, after what he did. He'd have a job covering it up, didn't they, Ern?" said Stan. "Old street blown up when a muggle's dead. What was it they'd said happened again, Ern?" "Gas explosion," grunted Ernie. "And now he's out," said Stan, examining the newspaper picture of Black's gaunt face again. "Never been a breakout of Azkaban before, has there, Ern? Beats me how he did it. Frightening, eh? Mind I don't fancy his chances against them Azkaban guards, eh, Ern?" Ernie suddenly shivered. "Talk about something else, Stan. There's a good lad. Them Azkaban guards give me the hobble wobbles." Stan put a paper away reluctantly, and Harry leaned against the window of the night bus, feeling worse than ever. He couldn't help imagining that Stan might be telling the passengers in a few nights' time, "Hear about that Harry Potter? Blew up his aunt. We'd had him on the night bus, didn't we, Aaron? He was trying to make a run for it. He, Harry, had broken wizard law just like Sirius. Was inflating Aunt March bad enough to land him in Azkaban? Harry didn't know anything about wizard prison, though everyone he'd ever heard speak of it before said it in a fearful tone. Hagrid, the Hogwarts gamekeeper, had spent 2 months there only last year. Harry wouldn't soon forget the look of terror on Hagrid's face when he had been told where he was going, and Hagrid was one of the bravest people Harry knew. The night bus rolled in the darkness, scattering brushes and wastebaskets, telephone booths and trees, and Harry lay restless and miserable on the feather bed. After a while, Stan remembered that Harry had paid for hot chocolate, but poured it over Harry's pillow when the bus moved abruptly from Anglesey to Aberdeen. One by one, wizards and witches in dressing in gowns and slippers descended from the upper floors to leave the bus. They all looked very pleased to go. Finally, Harry was the only passenger left. "Right then, Neville," said Harry, clapping his hands. "Whereabouts in London?" "Diagon Alley," said Harry. "Righto," said Sam. "Hold tight then." Bang! They were thundering down the Charing Cross Road. Harry sat up, watching the buildings easing themselves out of the bus's way. The sky was getting a little lighter. He would lie low for a couple of hours, go to Gringotts the moment it opened, then set off. Where? He didn't know. Ern slammed on the brakes and the night bus skidded to a halt in front of the small, shabby-looking pub, the Leaky Cauldron. Behind him lay the magical entrance to Diagon Alley. "Thanks," said Harry to Ern. He jumped down the steps and helped Stan lower his trunk and Hagrid's cage onto the pavement. "Well," said Harry, "bye then." But Stan wasn't paying attention. Still standing in the door of the bus, he was googling the shadowy entrance to the Leaky Cauldron. "There you are, Harry," said a voice. Before Harry could turn, he felt a hand on his shoulder. At the same time, Stan shouted, "Blimey, Ern! Come here! Come here, Ern!" Harry looked up at the owner of the hand on his shoulder and felt a bucket full of ice cascade into his stomach. He had walked right into Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic himself. Stan leapt onto the pavement beside him. "What'd you call him, Neville, mister?" he said excitedly. Fudge, a portly little man with a long, pint-strip cloak, looked at cold and exhausted. "Neville," he repeated fondly. "This is Harry Potter." "I knew it!" Stan shouted gleefully. Ern! Guess who Neville Ern is? Aye, it's Harry! Hey, I can see a scar!" "Yes," said Fudge testily. "Well, I'm very glad that the night bus picked Harry up, but he and I need to step into the leaky cauldron now." Fudge increased the pressure on Harry's shoulder, and Harry found himself being steered into the pub. A stooping figure bearing a lantern appeared through the door right behind the bar. It was Tom, the wizened, toothless landlord. "You've got a minister," said Tom. "Will you be wanting anything? Beer? Brandy?" "Perhaps a pot of tea," said Fudge, who still hadn't let go of Harry. There was a loud scrapping of puffing behind them, and Stan and Erd appeared, carrying Harry's trunk in Hedgewood's cage, looking around excitedly. "How come you didn't tell us who you are, Neville?" said Stan, beaming at Harry, while Ernie's owl-faced face appeared, interested over Stan's shoulder. "In a private parlor, please, Tom," said Fudge pointedly. "Bye," Harry said miserably to Stan and Ern, as Tom beckoned Fudge towards the passage that led from the bar. "Bye, Neville," called Stan. Fudge marched Harry along the part of the narrow passageway, after Tom's lantern, and then a small parlor. Tom clicked his fingers. A fire burst to life in the grate, and he bowed himself out of the room. "Sit down, Harry," said Fudge, indicating the chair by the fire. Harry sat down, feeling goosebumps rising on his arms despite the glow of the fire. Fudge took off his pinstripe coat and tossed it aside, then hitched up the trousers of his bottle-up green suit and sat down opposite of Harry. "I am Cornelius Fudge, Harry, the Minister of Magic." Harry already knew this, of course. He had seen Fudge once before, but he had been wearing his father's invisibility cloak at the time. Fudge wasn't to know about that. Tom, the innkeeper, reappeared, wearing an apron over his nightshirt and bearing a tray of tea and crumpets. He placed the tray on a table between Fudge and Harry and left the parlor, closing the door behind him. "Well, Harry," said Fudge, pouring out tea, "you've had us all in a right flap. I don't mind telling you. Running away from your uncle and his house like that, I'd like to think, but you're safe. That's all that matters." Fudge buttered himself a crumpet and pushed the plate towards Harry. "Eat, Harry. You look dead on your feet. Now then, you will be pleased to hear that we have dealt with the unfortunate blowing up of Mrs. Marjorie Dursley. 2 members of the Accidental Magical Reversal Department were dispatched to Privet Drive a few hours ago. Mrs. Dursley had been punctured, and her memory has been modified. She has no recollection of the incident at all, so that's that. No harm done." Smudge smiled over at Harry over the rim of his teacup, rather like an uncle surveying his favorite nephew. Harry, who couldn't believe his ears, opened his mouth to speak, couldn't think of anything to say, and closed it again. "Ah, you're worrying about the reaction of your aunt and uncle," said Fudge. "Well, I won't deny that they were extremely angry, Harry. But they were prepared to take you back next summer, as long as you stay at Hogwarts for Christmas and Easter holidays." Harry unstuck his throat. "I always stay at Hogwarts for the Christmas and Easter holidays," he said, "and I don't ever want to go back to Privet Drive." Now, I'm sure you'll feel differently once you've calmed down," said Fudge in a worried tone. "They're your family, Harry, after all. And I'm sure you're fond of each other, very deep down." It didn't occur to Harry to put Fudge right. He was still waiting to hear what was going to happen to him now. "So all that remains," said Fudge, now buttering himself a second crumpet, "is to decide where you're going to spend the last 2 weeks of your vacation. I suggest you take a room here at the Leaky Cauldron and—" "Hang on," said Harry, bloated. "What about my punishment?" Fudge blinked. "Punishment? I broke the law," said Harry. "The decree for restrictions of underage wizardry." "Oh, my dear boy, we're not going to punish you for a little thing like that," cried Fudge, waving a crumpet impatiently. "It was an accident. We don't send people to Azkaban for blowing up their aunt." But this didn't tally at all with Harry's dealings with the Ministry of Magic. "Last year, I got an official warning because a house elf smashed a pudding in my uncle's house," he told Fudge, frowning. "The Ministry of Magic said I'd be expelled from Hogwarts if there was any more magic there." Unless Harry's eyes were deceiving him, Fudge was suddenly looking awkward. "Circumstances change, Harry. We have to take into account the present climate. Surely you don't want to be expelled." "Of course I don't," said Harry. "Well then, what's all the fuss about?" said laughed Fudge. "Now have a crumpet, Harry, while I go to see if Tom's got a room for you." Fudge strode out of the parlor, and Harry stared after him. There was something extremely odd going on. Why had Fudge been waiting for him at the leaky cauldron? If not the punishment for what he'd done. Now Harry came to think of it. Surely wasn't it unusual for the Minister of Magic himself to be involved in matters of underage magic? Fudge came back, accompanied by Tom and the innkeeper. Room 11's free, Harry, said Fudge. I think you'll be very comfortable. Just one thing. I'm sure you'll understand. I don't want you wandering off into Muggle London, alright? Keep to Diagon Alley, and you're to be back before dark each night. I'm sure you'll understand. Tom will be keeping an eye on you for me. Okay, said Harry slowly. But why? Don't want to lose you again, do we? Said Fudge with a hearty laugh. No. Best you are, best we know where you are, Fudge cleared his throat loudly and picked up his pinstripe coat. Well, I'll best be off. Plenty to do, you know. Have you had any luck with Black yet? Harry asked. Fudge's finger slipped on the finger fastening of his coat. What's that? Oh, you've heard. Well, no, not yet. But it's only a matter of time. The Azkaban guards have never failed yet, and they are angrier than I've ever seen them. Fudge shuddered slightly. So, I'll say goodbye. He held out his hand, and Harry, shaking it, had a sudden idea. Minister, can I ask you something? Certainly, said Harry with a smile. Well, third years at Hogwarts are allowed to visit Hogsmeade, but my aunt and uncle didn't sign my permission form. Do you think you could? Fudge looked uncomfortable. Harry said. No, I'm sorry, Harry, but I'm not your parent or guardian. But you're the Minister of Magic, Harry said eagerly. If you gave me permission... No, I'm sorry, Harry, but rules are rules, said Fudge flatly. Perhaps you'll be able to visit Hogsmeade next year. In fact, I don't think it's best if you don't. Yes, well, I'll be off. Enjoy your stay, Harry. With a last smile and the shake of Harry's hand, Fudge left the room. Tom now moved forward, beaming at Harry. If you'll follow me, Mr. Potter, he said. I've already taken your things up. Harry followed Tom up a handsome wooden staircase to a door with a brass number 11 on it, which Tom unlocked and opened up for him. Inside was a very comfortable looking bed, some highly polished oak furniture, a cheerful cracking fire, and perched on top of his wardrobe, Hedwig, Harry gasped. The snowy owl clipped her beak and fluttered onto his arm. Very smart owl you got there, chuckled Tom. Arrived about 5 minutes after you did. If there's anything you need, Mr. Potter, don't hesitate to ask. He gave another bow and left. Harry sat on his bed for a long time, absent-mindedly stroking Hedwig. The sky outside the window was changing rapidly from deep, velvety blue to cold, steely gray, and then slowly to pink with gold. Harry could hardly believe that he'd left Privet Drive only a few hours ago, that he wasn't expelled, and that he was now facing 2 completely Dursley-free weeks. It's been a weird night, Hedwig, he yawned, and without even removing his glasses, he slumped back onto the pillows and fell asleep. Oh wow, a lot happened with Harry Potter. What do you think, Ozzy? I enjoyed that part too. We'll see you on the next adventure, okay? And we'll see you on the next adventure, here with Wayne Reads. Thank you for joining us, and we can't wait to see you again. Bye-bye!